Hi guys, my name is Nicole Wallace and I am doing mine on Mary Wollstonecraft. What she is an advocate for is women's rights and education, and it's definitely important for our class. Alright, so when and where, kind of a generalization of where she was during her whole life. She was very young when she passed away. She lived from 1759 to 1797, which is very young, even for that age, even for that like time. So being in Great Britain, she was born in London. She did move to Ireland at one point and Wales and kind of all over there, but for the most part, Great Britain, Europe area. She was during the time of the Age of Enlightenment. So she was around during the time where thinking was the new thing. With anything, with art, with science, with intellectual thinking, like anything you can think of, that was the time it was first started. Just as kind of like one of those things, like Isaac Newton, for instance, was during that time or so during that time. Alrighty. So to kind of give you guys a backstory of who this woman was, she was a middle class woman classified for the time. She was a female. She did have an abusive father, which having that home life can affect someone. Um, in which case, feminists don't like men, which is kind of relevant here because she obviously did not like her father. She moved out as soon as she could. Um, but having those ideas for wanting better for women definitely sprouted out of that, in my opinion. I mean, wanting better for yourself and knowing what you don't want from your home life is definitely an inspiration for new ideas. So in this picture here, um, she actually opened up a school with her sister Eliza Bishop, her friend Fanny Blood, and later Mary's and Eliza's sisters Evering tried to support themselves by opening a school in Newington Green. Forgive my typo there, it does happen. Um, but with this school, the idea was to educate females. So during that time, females weren't really educated as much as men. If you were really rich and you had, someone there to educate the children and women overheard it, then yeah, why not? But it wasn't like every single woman got educated. It wasn't a necessity for that time. So her opening up that school kind of did some stuff. Later on, she did write some books. She was a great writer, clearly. She has so many things published and is such an inspiration to our times. So, thoughts on the education of daughters kind of goes into this was right after her. These are all in order for the timeline. So, thoughts of the education of daughters kind of goes over why women need to be educated, not necessarily by their mothers, but educated, but it is heavily on the mothers. If a mother is incapable of teaching their daughters, then how can they have their own minds to move forward? Kind of a thought. A vindication of rights of women, since it's pretty much her uh, argument towards Rousseau, who was also an inspirational thinker at the time. He believed that women didn't necessarily need to be educated, but had to be there for their man. Um, so she kind of goes back and says, no, like, we're fully capable. We just have to be taught. We're not incapable of learning. You are just not teaching. Which is kind of eye opening because at the time people didn't really think that deeply. And the idea that women could be taught and actually retain the information is something new to them. And then she writes later on in her life, Mary, a fiction. This is based heavily on her life itself. And the serious oppression of women by circumstances in her life. So, kind of just going off of that. New word. All right. Governess. I picked this word because she was actually a governess at a point in her life. So basically, what that is, it's a woman hired to teach the children in a private household. That term is still used today, but back then in Britain, that's what she was. The difference between a governess and a nanny is a governess focuses more on the education. So, like in my mind, it's kind of like a private teacher that's just at home, but a nanny only takes care of like nursery duties and primary care. So that's where they kind of differentiate there. All right, I got some quotes here. So ideas and influence, just kind of read you a couple quotes that I found extremely interesting. Wollstonecraft progressively argues should be gradually impaired and individualized to fit each child. Ideally, children should learn not from direct teaching, but living examples apprehended through the senses. The first inlets to the heart, and the improvement of those instruments of the understanding is the object education should constantly in view, and over which we have most power. So with her quote saying that, I mean, wow. I mean, just during that time, like having that idea that being in a time where there's so many different theories on how people learn, and having this date back to where she was and her saying this during the time of enlightenment, like, no, they learn from home. Who would have thought, right? She did. Yeah, so I mean, that's crazy. All right. She also maintained that if girls were encouraged from an early age to develop their minds, it would be seen that they were rational creatures, and there was no reason whatsoever for them not to be given the same opportunities as boys. With regard to education and training, women could enter professions and have careers just the same as men. Now, I'm not a big feminist, but it blows my mind that it started during this time. Like, she was the spark that started women wanting to fight for their rights, in a sense. Not their rights, but their right to education and their right to, if you just teach us, we can be just as good as you, kind of a thing, which is extremely mind-blowing. So it basically extended the basic ideas and the philosophy that women should be educated, boys and girls, not just boys. Whoops. A little connection. So it is the start of feminism. She kind of like sparked it, made it work out. Basically, yeah, struck it up. She was the one that first said it on paper, in person, like was around so many different thinkers at the time, and to bring something up that maybe they weren't thinking of or didn't want to say for some reason, she had the power to do it, so she did. It wouldn't be the same without her, because during that time of enlightenment, there was so many other thinkers, but most of them were men. So it was really important to have a woman to stand up for women's education and rights, to get men to actually think differently, like, oh, like here's a woman before us, educated, in the great room of speakers, as well as us. Maybe she has something important to say, and maybe if other women were educated, they would have something to say as well and something to contribute to our world. So I think without her, it wouldn't have been the same. I'm not saying that she was the only one, but she was definitely the one that stuck out.